Good evening. My name is Meg Griffin, and we're here at the Carroll County Public Library, the Mount Airy branch, interviewing Linda Shane, who has been a part of Carroll history that she's going to talk about. Welcome, Linda. We're glad you could come. We're going to start off with a little background information on you. Well, where were you born?
I was born in Baltimore.
Okay. And so when did you come to Mount Airy or to Carroll County?
Came to living in Carroll County in '65. But my family had come from Carroll County, so for my dad it was kind of full circle.
Okay. So you have some lots of childhood memories of Carroll County.
Yeah.
And then your parents, you have a little bit of history as far as your extended family that you want to share with us?
My dad was born on his grandparents' farm in Carroll County, and after his family moved to Baltimore, he got to spend summers up there. And so I grew up being told that Carroll was God's country, and that's and he always hated the fall because that was when he had to go back to Baltimore.
Was it in this area of Carroll County?
No, he was born in Millers, which is up near Hampstead.
Okay.
And all my cousins and such that I visited were up around that area. And then in '61, we bought a farm. My parents bought a farm right outside of Mount Airy. And then when my husband and I were married in '64, we bought a house in Mount Airy and lived there 7 years before we moved out to outside of Mount Airy too.
Okay, where in Mount Airy was your house?
Up by the cemetery. We had a big old house up there that at one time the lady hadn't taken in boarders, but she served to the summer visitors. They had a dining room built on the side of the house, and she served meals. And so that was, and then after her family got rid of it, the people that we bought it from had bought it, and they had an antique shop in the shed behind the house there.
Is it there still?
Mm-hmm. Not the shop,
Okay.
but the house is, yeah.
And it's right near, so is it like across the street from the
No, it's
cemetery?
on the south side,
Oh, I
right
see,
adjoining it.
Ah,
So,
that's interesting. So do you have any childhood tales that you remember, or that you say your father had lots of stories. Were there any stories that he used to talk about when he would take you through Carroll County when you were growing up?
well, we did, because we lived, when we were down in Baltimore, it wasn't in the city, it was over towards Bel Air Road. And so when we came up through the Worthington Valley and up Brysterstown Road and all that way, and we always had tales along the way. It was, he was born, as I said, in his grandparents' house, and that was the house that my grandmother had grown up in. And after we got married, I got geese one year, and my grandmother pitched a royal fit, because when she was the youngest of 10, and when they lived on the farm, they had one of those with the high porches and the lower level, and it was her job to keep that lower level, and that's where the geese would go at night, and she hated them with a purple passion. She kept saying to me, "They're such dirty things, why would you want them?"
And what did you do with them?
Oh, we had them for eggs, and
really?
we ate them.
Oh.
My son-in-law still regrets that we don't have them now because he loved them. But when we had always, my parents were both German descent, and all the time I was growing up, we used to say, they came over in the 1800s, after about the time of the Civil War, we figured. And then I had a cousin when I was in high school who started doing family stuff, and he found out that my dad's family actually went back to the Revolution in this country. And they started out up in Pennsylvania, but just over the line from Manchester, and then they had moved down to Millers.
Boy, so you have a rich history.
A long time.
Yeah. Now, how did you meet your husband? Did he grow up here?
He his dad was a farm manager, and they moved constantly. So he spent a good part of his time in Carroll County, but they lived up in Pennsylvania, they lived down in Montgomery County. At the time that I met him, they were living in Frederick County. They had finally bought a farm after all those years, but Phil actually had gone to 17 different schools before he graduated because they moved so frequently.
Wow.
And he used to talk about it when they lived during the war. His dad had worked at Congolium over near Westminster. Okay. And he used to talk about getting onto the train with his brother and the two of them, about 5 and 7, being allowed to go down to Baltimore, you know. And you just think, oh.
Times have changed. Jeez.
But I had met him. I had wanted to go to my cousins over in Manchester for a butchering on New Year's Day. And my dad used to get very provoked with me because I hated socializing. I hated parties and everything like this. And my dad finally said to me, if you don't go to the party on New Year's Eve, you're not going to the butchering I'm not going to let you have the car for the butchering on New Year's Day. So I went to the party and I met Phil. And then it snowed the next day and I couldn't go to the butchering anyway. I didn't think that was fair.
But look at the wisdom of your dad. So was butchering a social event?
Oh, yeah.
Well, describe that. That's, to me, seems like it'd be...
My cousin's husband, his father was a butcher up in Hanover, and he grew up with it. And then when they got the farm, when he moved on to his wife's family farm in Carroll County, they had an old spring house out behind the house, and that was where they did butchering. And that time of year, it was usually pigs, but they did beef and beef, chickens, everything. And
was it kind of just like a party? I mean,
well, there were 5 of my cousins, and their parents, and the neighbors would come in, you know, and he would butcher for other people as well. Mm-hmm. So after my husband and I got married, once every now and then we'd get a pig and take it to Willie, and then we'd go for the butchering, you know, and you'd do all the cutting and packaging and what have you. Mm-hmm. It was a day-long thing. So it was more like just
kind of a talking and I mean, did you ever cook any of it while you...
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
It was...
And at one time when I was a kid, we had apple trees and they didn't. And so it got to be a thing. We would take apples to their farm and we'd make apple butter every fall. And there would be half a dozen or more families involved. And one year, I had been reading something and they had put silver dollars in the bottom of the kettle so that when you stirred it, it helped keep it from the apple butter from sticking to the kettle. So I had talked them into doing this, and they took their kids' dollars that they had saved and put them in the kettle. And then when we jarred it, we were missing $1. Oh, jeez. And they always blamed me for that. But then on Christmas morning, they opened a jar of apple butter, and here was a little missing silver dollar. She was just glad they hadn't given that one away. But yeah, it used to be that you would get together for these things. Weddings, funerals. Unfortunately, a lot of times that was the only time that you really got the whole family together. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big part of the social thing. You know, it was, you grieved, but also afterward you would usually go back to the home, right. And everybody would tell tales about things that they remembered, and mm-hmm. It was sad, but it was still good.
Yeah, it was like a celebration of their life.
Right. And the butcherings and all, it was the same sort of thing. It was just a bunch of people coming together, and it was fun. It really was.
And did you continue to do that? Was that after you were married, did you do that, or was it more?
Yeah.
Well, talk a little bit about that, about your...
Phil made it up to me. He did take me to a butchering after we got married. But also, these cousins, when I was growing up, we didn't live on a farm. And so I got to spend a week or so with these cousins in Carroll County every year. And one of the things that they did was, there was a big farm farmers market as well as the livestock markets down in Baltimore. And in the summer, Willie would take sweet corn into midnight market, which meant that every afternoon, about 4 or 5 o'clock, you hit the fields and you pulled dozens and dozens of ears of corn and you'd bag them.
So you had to carry big sacks along?
No, we didn't. They'd give us aprons, and then you'd get so many dozen in the apron, and then you'd put it into the sack, and I think it was 5 dozen to a sack, if I'm not mistaken. And the sacks would be stacked at the end of the row, and then they'd load up his truck, and wet everything down, and he'd go to bed. And then he would get up about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and go down to the market. And he'd come home he wouldn't get home till 5, 6 o'clock in the morning.
So it would be in
usually.
Baltimore that he would go to?
Yeah. And one year, when I first started going up there, they didn't have an inside toilet.
Yeah.
And this one summer, they were getting an inside toilet finally, and they were digging the septic tank out back. And the feed man came to deliver, and he was talking about watermelons. And he said, well, he had watermelons over at I think it was in Lineborough. And they said, well, if he'd bring them back, we'd pay him $1 a piece for any watermelons he brought back. And each of the kids said, I'll get one. And I had said 2. So we went ahead, and he brought us back 8 watermelons that we paid for. And then Willie came home from market the next morning, and he brought the whole pickup truck full of watermelons. Oh. We ate them for 3 meals a day. But he paid 30 cents for his, and he's saying, you dummies, you paid $1.
So they must have been somewhat dear, watermelons, because, now you can get them in the store for $3.88, $4. So I guess... the farming has come along as far as.
But the farmer doesn't get that much more. That's the sad thing.
Yeah.
Still.
But I guess it's just a draw to the store too. If I remember the price, that means that So you lived outside of on the Frederick County side of Mount Airy.
Mm-hmm. Was where my dad finally bought a farm. We were a quarter of a mile from Carroll County there.
So your kids, by the time your children were school age, was it a separate South Carroll, Linganore split, or
Yes.
did they still do the?
Well, and my oldest daughter went to first grade in Mount Airy, and then at the end of her year, we moved out there, and we tried to get them, if we would take her up to Buffalo Road, which was the dividing line, to let her go, but they wouldn't. So then the kids did have to go to Frederick County, and it was...
That kind of made a difference. But then you yourself got a job here at the library.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? What year was it that you first started?
Owen was in kindergarten, so that would have been 83 or 84, somewhere there.
And then it was in the where the town hall is now. Well, what kind of changes have you seen in the library since then?
Well, when we first lived in town, the library was still in the old town hall building, the triangular one there on the corner. The police were in there for a while. And the stairs going up to it were so narrow that if you had this many books in your arms, you couldn't walk up straight. You had to turn sideways to get up the steps.
It's a way of limiting checkouts.
Yeah. And the librarian, you'd ask her where something was, and she'd say, right there, right there. She never got up. It was just right there. And then they did go over to Town Hall, which was really roomy after the first one.
Yeah.
And then in '93, of course, they built this and moved everything up here. Yeah. And in Fingsburg, they were talking about the staff working, stocking the shelves. And here it was all volunteer, or mostly volunteer. The staff worked, but the community really pitched in.
To move it from Main Street
to pack it up and move it over and put everything on the shelves.
Yeah, I had heard tales that it was actually sort of almost like they call it a fireman line, where one person would give it to the next person to the next. Is that really what?
Yeah. And people would bring their vehicles, and back up to there in front of the old library, and they'd load them up with whatever we had, and they'd drive over here, and then in they'd come, and they'd shelve them. So it was, I think they spent 3 days, and then the staff came in and finished organizing things and getting things ready to open.
So as much as they say things change, it seems like the sense of community here has stayed pretty constant.
Yeah.
Well, if someone was coming to the library and had never been to Mount Airy, what would you point out to them as what's made the most impression on you of the town? What stands out most to you about Mount Airy?
The people. You know, it just, when we had our house in town, the people we were newly married, so we were quite young, and our neighbors were in their 60s. I thought they were ancient. But they had been truck farmers and had actually owned the land that adjoined the cemetery, and what's now Wildwood Park was all part of what they had farmed at one time. And so an awful lot of what we did with the gardening and everything was with Brown's input.
Yeah,
And the first year that we raised potatoes, we had one that ran a couple pounds. I mean, it was enormous. And we took it over to show Mr. Brown, and his face just lit up. He says, "Oh, I can't wait. I have to show that to Mr. Robinson," who was on his other side, because apparently every year they had a kind of a contest to see who had the biggest potato, and ours was bigger than any of them. So he was really ready to put Mr. Robinson down.
Oh, that's interesting. So you farmed, right, from you and your husband when you got married?
Yeah, my husband was dairying when we married. Okay. And then his parents sold the farm without telling us they had, so it got kind of hairy there for a while. But then we farmed with my dad, just on a part-time basis.
And you still kind of do it now. Right?
Yeah, we still have a farm.
Some things haven't changed.
But every year we actually farm a little bit less.
Well, it was very nice talking to you, Linda. I think that was a good way to end it. So
Okay.
thanks a lot.